Namaskar, Nilesh Oak here with the next session on Shraddha and Pradnya. Today, we will wind up our discussion on the Mars evidence of Mahabharata text. All right. Something for you to ponder. You can take a moment and read it. And we will begin with part 14 of Shraddha and Pradnya. Pujya Buddhi to Pramanya Buddhi to Viveka Buddhi. That's how we are going to take the journey. You can think in terms of Adnyasya Ashraddha Dhanasya Samshayatma Vinashyati. So Adnya, opposite of that is Pradnya, you can say, or Jnana. Okay, that's the Pradnya Buddhi or Viveka Buddhi. Ashraddha Dhanasya, that is that Pujya Buddhi, Shraddha Buddhi versus Ashraddha Buddhi. And Samshaya. So how do we remove Samshaya? We remove Samshaya through Pramanya Buddhi, okay, looking at the evidence, but not just evidence alone, because in analyzing any piece of evidence, we have to take certain things as established. We have to accept certain things as well established. That is the background knowledge. That's where the Shraddha comes into the picture. Not that you cannot question anything. You can question anything, but one thing at a time. And the second thing you need, even with the evidence and the proper use of logic, you still need a Viveka Buddhi. For example, a Valmiki Ramayana reference or text would say things like, Dashrath was 60,000 years old, or after Bhagwan Ram returned to Ayodhya, he ruled for 10,000 years. Or that's a Shabda Praman. But think of this Shabda Praman more in the sense of also a authoritative word of, say, someone expert, someone learned, some guru. And the guru might be simply repeating what he or she has heard, and the guru may not be expert in that particular aspect. So guru might simply repeat what he or she has read from the previous commentators, or some translation, some interpretation from Puranas, or even Itihasa, Shruti, Smriti. But somebody taking it blindly, now that will fall into Shraddha or Pujya Buddhi, and it might do the job for that individual who accepts it with the Shraddha. However, if that person uses only that type of evidence, whether it is a Shabda Praman, whether it is somebody's word, whether it is authority, whether it is a word of someone that one specific individual considers as authoritative, and uses that evidence to fight with somebody else who may not consider that word as authoritative, or may not consider that praman as sufficient. Just like Bhagwan Krishna says to Uddhava, Shruti Pratyaksham Aitiyam Anumanam Chatushtayam. There has to be a quadrangulation of Shruti Smriti, Pratyaksha, Aitiya, and Anuman. Otherwise, our knowledge can remain unstable. It may always remain unstable. Pramaneshu anavasthanad. Without that, our knowledge remains unstable. Okay, vikalpaat savirajate, and it can lead to confusion, delusion, and so on. All right. So that's why I showed you that previous picture for something for you to ponder. We are going to go through the summary of the Mars evidence of Mahabharata. Total 8 pieces of evidence. Because I have done this before, I'm going to go fast through this. Out of that, we looked at the first evidence for the retrograde motion of Mars. Okay. And how did we get that information? Okay, Purusha Graha. Mars is also referred to as a Purusha Graha. It is identified in the Mahabharata text as Lohitanga. And the description says it was settled, it has become steady, it has become fixed, Dhruva, steady, fixed, as it started moving in the non-normal direction, Apasavya direction, while becoming extra bright, scary bright, as it started moving in the non-normal direction. And Mars did this in the region of Chitra and Swati, Nakshatra, Chitra and Swati. And that is indeed all the descriptions of a retrograde motion. Now, that same retrograde motion of Mars is described in the Mahabharata text in another parva. Instead of Bhishma parva, it is given in a Udyoga parva. And we also looked at that, and that comes out in the form of Visheshenahi Vashneya Chitram Pediyate Graha. That Graha we know is again Mars, this time described as Angaraka in Udyog Parva. And that was giving a pida, it was afflicting Nakshatra Chitra in a very peculiar fashion. This together is the retrograde motion of Mars. Then we looked at 4 Mars observations. The first observation tells us where was Mars on the first day of the Mahabharata war. Again, who? Lohitanga. When? The first day of the Mahabharata war. How or what about it? Well, after going through vakra, anuvakra motions, and now we know actually what the vakra, anuvakra motions are, which I'll show you on the next page again, which is the oblique crossing of Mars across the ecliptic from south side to the north, and then from north side to the south. So after going through these vakra and anuvakra motions, Mars came near bright nakshatra Shravana and aligned itself along the same rutta, Samavrutta, same rutta as another nakshatra, Brahma Rashi, Brahma nakshatra, nakshatra of a Brahma or Abhijit. And we also showed how it was from a longitude measurement perspective or right ascension, which is same, just different ways of measuring the same thing, like say miles versus kilometers. It was right, it was aligned right against Brahma Rashi, that is between Nakshatra Shravan and Nakshatra Dhanishta. We saw that. Then next observation, number 6, for the first day of war, the Mahabharata text tells us that Angaraka and Buddha, that is Mars and Mercury, were seen together. Okay. And we saw that they were within the 40 degrees of each other on the first day of the war. Then next reference, on the same day, first day, Shukra Angarak, that is Venus and Mars, were seen together near each other. And the data for 5561 BC tells us that they were within 4 to 7 degrees. I think it was 7 degrees. Okay, very, very close. And then fast forward to the last day and the 18th day of the war. And now we have a description of all 3 of them. By 3, I mean Bhrugu Suno, Venus, Dhara Putro, Mars, Shashi Jaina, Mercury, all together in the same part of the sky on the 18th day of the war. So these are the 4 descriptions. We showed how that is true for the year 5561 BCE. Specifically, the top 3 observations, how they are true for the first day of the Mahabharata war, 16th October 5561 BCE. And the last observation, number 8, how what is described is true for the last and the 18th day of the war, 2nd November 5561 BCE. All right. And then the vakra motions. Okay. So now that we already explained the retrograde motion of Mars as described in the Mahabharata text at the time of Mahabharata war, where Mars went retrograde near Chitra and Swati. Now the question comes, Mars goes retrograde only once in 2+ years, so it's not going to go retrograde again. So what is this business with the vakra motions of Mars twice? First near Magha Swangarako Vakra, okay, and then again near Jeshta Anuradha, but also Jupiter, Brahaspati, doing that Vakra motion near Nakshatra Shravan. In this context, we discussed the nodes of the planets, of all planets, but specifically the node of the planet Mars, node of the planet Jupiter. We also discussed how this is a well understood concept, and frankly and surprisingly, very interestingly, only in the Indian astronomy, only in the ancient Indian astronomy. Until 500 years ago, until the Western Europe finally got into some empirical science, because until then it was all a very dogmatic way of understanding things, okay, very religious, things suppressed through religious control. But finally, they could break it, not very easily. I mean, still you can see the effect of those. And frankly, they become aware of this business of the nodes of the planets, and that in astronomy, one even ought to consider them or do something about their measurements. And now in modern times, last 100 years, let's say, they have, or maybe longer than 100 years, they have built complex equations for predicting the movement of the node of the planets. But guess what? It's still, these are still extremely complex formulae, not well understood, and not surprisingly, they are defining their range as plus minus 5,000 years. Now, the problem with that, at least looking at the phenomenal, earth-shattering, mind-boggling information and data from ancient Indian astronomy Siddhanta texts such as Surya Siddhanta, what we know is that these cycles are huge. I mean, I don't know what's the right word to use. For example, Surya Siddhanta tells us the orbital period for the node of Mars is 20 million years. The orbital period for the node of Jupiter is 25 million years. Amazing, right? Fortunately, even these types of observations were noted down by Vyasadeva in the Mahabharata text. And even when the node of a planet is a mathematical point where it cuts the ecliptic, in reality, this is true for Rahu and Ketu, the nodes of moon also. But in case of planets such as Mars, it is also true that in reality, although it's a mathematical point, in reality, it's a big range of about 3 zodiac, like a 90-degree, over which it meaning the Mars will cut the ecliptic from the north to the south, or south to the north to the south, or south to the north, at 2 different places, of course. Now, they are not exactly opposite like the nodes of the moon, the Rahu and Ketu. In fact, these are called trine, like, they're separated by, like, say, 120 degrees. Again, that's approximately. But the accuracy and precision and our ability to test or validate the orbital period is fortunately not an issue. We have very specific observations of these vakra motions at the time of the Mahabharata war, that the Mars doing it near Magha, and then again near Jeshta Anuradha, and Jupiter doing it near Nakshatra Shravan. And we could show all of them. Okay, just as a quick summary, I'm going to walk you through all of these. Now, have I opened, have we opened a Pandora's box? The answer is yes. Or a can of worms, or, we are just boiling their kettle of fish. Okay. This knowledge, so precise, so mind-boggling, is there in the Mahabharata text. And we have just scratched the surface, guys. We have so far only looked at the Mars evidence. And now you will see how we are going to start making the connection. But before I do that, what I want to do is quickly go through the summary and come back to this page. Okay. So what I am going to do is quickly take you to the simulation. Again, 1st of January, 5562 BC. Remember, that's where we started. Mars is to the south of the ecliptic. Okay. We will begin with, let's say 3-day. Let's see how that goes. Okay. So Mars is now going in the eastern direction. It's still to the south of the ecliptic. Okay. We are taking a step change of 3 days at a time. We will change if required. Now look how the sun is coming closer to the Mars. What does that mean? As seen from the Earth, okay, Sun and Mars and Mercury in this case are very close together, which means at this point, we will not able to see the Mars from the Earth because it's so close to the Sun. But what is going to happen is very soon, Sun would bypass Mars. And now again, we will able to see the Mars, okay, on the other side, which is to say, if we could see Mars after sunset before, now we would able to see it before sunrise, okay, and so on. All right, so this continues. Mars is still to the south of the ecliptic. It is getting close to the ecliptic. And somewhere here now, we can see that Mars is on the ecliptic, where around Gemini, Ardra. That's the range. And this Gemini does fall into the range for the node of the Mars, okay, going from south to the north. All right, so we continue. Now Mars is getting to the north of the ecliptic. You can see the red line, the orbit of the Mars. Now that's the mean position. You can think of the line as the mean position, and the red dot where Mars is the actual position. In Surya Siddhanta language, that is a Madhyamadikar, when you calculate the mean position of the Mars or any planet. That's the whole chapter on identifying the mean positions called Madhyamadikar. And then to find the exact position, there is another chapter in Surya Siddhanta called Spashtadikar. Okay, how beautiful. Think of that as again vernier caliper, or think of that as a micrometer, right? Vernier caliper, you are taking approximate reading on the main scale, and then you are fine tuning on the vernier scale and bringing those two numbers together to get the precise and accurate answers. That's what Surya Siddhanta does. First, a approximate answer with Madhyamadikar, and then a precise answer by using the formula described in Spashtadikar chapter. All right. Okay, so let's go now. Now that it has crossed to the other side, to the north, and first time we can distinctly see this. You know, it's easy in software simulation to expand this thing. But imagine making a quick observations in the sky. It's going to take some time. By the way, when this particular observation is made, here we will say, when we clearly know that the Mars has crossed the ecliptic and has appeared on the other side, it was near Nakshatra Magha. Which Nakshatra Magha, the Yoga Tara, is very, very close to the ecliptic. Almost it's right on the ecliptic. What do you say? Well, it's not an ecliptic. Well, why do you say it's on ecliptic? Then you don't understand astronomy. It is on ecliptic in comparison to many other Yogataras that you can see. For example, Yogataras of Punarvasus, Yogatara of Pusha, Yogatara of Ashlesha, Yogatara of Purva Falguni, Uttara Falguni. In that comparison, Magha is indeed on the ecliptic. All right, we just continue. Sorry. We just continue our journey of Mars. Now remember, so that one observation, Magha Swangarako Vakra. All right. And now we are going to get at the retrograde motion. Dhruva prajvalito ghoram apasavya pravartate chitra swatyantare chaiva dishtita parusha graha. Okay, so Mars is now in the region of Chitra and Swati. it proceeded towards Vishakha, but did not quite go there. It turned backward, okay, and like here, and it came again close to Chitra. That is that Visheshe Nahi Vashneya Chitra Pidiyate Graha. And then look, now again, it's proceeding further, forward motion. Now it's on the ecliptic, okay? And so here, when is it on the ecliptic? Here, near Nakshatra Vishakha Anuradha, that is the area of a Libra and then Scorpio. You can go and check the nodes of the Mars, the northern node and southern node in internet, and you'll find this is going from north to the south. So southern node, it is in the region of Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius. So this time, remember, it's a big range. Sometime it will do it right here in the Libra area, sometime in Scorpio, or sometime all the way to Sagittarius. So right now it is doing it near the intersection of Libra, that is this here, and a Scorpio. Okay, so there. Okay, and where is it doing it? It is crossing the ecliptic, going vakra, oblique crossing near Nakshatra, Anuradha, and Jeshta. That is that Krutva Changarako Vakra, Jeshtaya Madhusudana, Anuradha Prarthayate, Maitram Sangshan Mandiva. This is on around July 55-61 BCE, about 3 years before the Mahabharata war. Okay, we are going to now come all the way to October 16. That is the first day of the Mahabharata war. Okay, October 16, that is where it is. And all right, so I need to figure this out. My apologies. These are different reminders, for different things that I do. All right, so October 16, 55-61 BCE. And what do I want to show you here is that now there are 4 references. Out of that, 3 references for the first day of the Mahabharata war, which is to say, what is this position of Mars? Okay, that's at 1422. Look at Abhijit, Brahmarashi, Samavrutta, that's 1432. So 22 and 32, that's like a 10 minutes of difference, which is about 2.5 degree difference. So think of it like they're this much, this much in a difference in terms of their longitude, okay, the variation. So they're right at the same spot. Consider that the Shravan Nakshatra is before Mars and Dhanishta is after Mars. And within the 27 Nakshatra, we only consider Shravan and Dhanishta, and we don't consider Abhijit. Okay, when we include that 28 Nakshatra, Abhijit or Brahmarashi or Brahmya Nakshatra, the Nakshatra of a Brahma, then that's exactly what it is showing. In fact, the reason it's called Brahma Rashi is because it's the nakshatra of a Brahma, and the Mars longitude is same as Abhijit longitude, okay, or the Brahma Rashi longitude. So that's one of the 4 references from Mars. We already did 2 references for retrograde. We did additional 2 references for vakra near Magha and vakra near Jeshta Anuradha. So 4 references are done, 4 references are remaining. Out of those 4, I just showed you for the first day of the war, Mars Brahma Rashi Samavrutta. This is Brahma Rashi Samavrutta Lohitango Vyavastita. It aligned right along the same longitude as Abhijit. Okay. Now on the first day, we also have to note down that Mars needs to be in the same region as Venus. You can see this is Mars here and this is Venus. They're separated by about 7 degrees. Okay, so they're closer. So that's another validation of another reference. And then if you look at, let me remove the thing. So here, okay, so think of this here. So Mercury here and Mars here, and they are separated by about 40 degrees. Okay, so think of 40 degrees as something like this in the sky. If you look at sky, that's what it will show up to be. Okay. 40, if this is 90 degrees, if I make this horizontal and this is straight up, if I do halfway of that will be like a 45, and think of slightly less. That is 3 of the 4 references, which 3 references were meant for the first day of the war. And then what we have to do is go through the 18 days of the war to the last day of the war. So notice what happened. Jupiter is here, Mercury is here, Sun is here. As I do the simulation, go through the 18 days, you're going to find that the Mercury very aggressively goes further east of Jupiter. Okay, so by the time we get to the 18th day of the war, that is 2nd November, okay, Mercury is, look how Mercury is, like Sun is here, Jupiter is here, Mercury is here. And the last day's reference, Bhrugu Suno Dhara Putro. So this is Bhrugu Suno Dhara Putro Shashi Jaina Samanvito. They were close by, they were seen. Okay, so that is also validated. All the 8 references are validated for the year 5561 BCE. Okay, so quickly, couple of points. Let me get back to the Pandora's box. So have we opened the Pandora's box? Yes. Now, Pandora's box is considered a scary thing. I don't know if it's considered a bad thing. In some ways, it is a bad thing if you are familiar with the Greek mythology related to this. I would, instead of me telling the story and increasing the length of the video, I will encourage you to go and read it. But I'm also confident that you have heard the terms opening the can of worms, or kettle of fish, opening Pandora's box. If you are familiar, great. If not, go back to internet. Okay, internet is our friend. Everyone has a smartphone. Read about it. Now, have we done that? Have you opened the Pandora's box? Have you opened the can of worms? The answer is yes. But who should be scared? Okay, those people, those individuals who have simply continued the tired narrative simply because they are lazy, or simply because they are incompetent, or simply because they are dogmatic, and somehow they wanted to stick to whatever was known without ever bothering to validate, to corroborate, to empirically test any of these astronomy observations. They should be worried. They are worried, by the way, guys. Okay, they are worried. And you're going to see a lot of noise that eventually they're going to make. Right now, they will not make it, okay? Because they're just wondering who goes first out of those 130. Granted, all the 130 Mahabharata researchers are not around anymore, but easily 30 plus folks are out there right now watching my videos. Okay, their followers are watching my videos. Okay, so it's going to be a very interesting thing. Again, I want to make it very clear that even with their dogmatic approach, even with their incompetent approach, they have the very fact that they did something and they said, me too, and proposed 1 year. In a way, they have contributed to this yajna, we can say, the dating of the Mahabharata, understanding our history, taking our history away from the entire Western nonsense of at least last 300 plus years. But let's not discount the dogmatic element that exists within the Sanatana, and that is not just because of, say, Western Europeans or the colonialism. That existed before. Okay, and at some point I'm going to discuss these references. For example, using the concept of astronomy yugas, okay, but in a very illogical, unscientific, and a dogmatic fashion, or how can we say, in a very naive fashion. We exactly don't know who used it, okay, or if that was a one individual or multiple individuals, but that concept was used in the Puranas or in the interpretation or translation of Puranas, and that has made a mess of, okay, a disaster of our chronology, the chronology of Sanatana civilization, chronology of Hindu civilization, chronology of Bharatiya civilization, chronology of Indian civilization. Okay, so yes, this has opened the Pandora's box, opened a can of worms, kettle of fish, it's boiling. and a lot of interesting things are going to come out. Okay. You will see not only for the actual Mahabharata researchers. Right now we're talking Mahabharata, so I'm saying Mahabharata researcher. It applies to Ramayana researchers, Ramayana dating researchers. It applies to Rigveda dating researchers, and therefore many of our ancient epochs, even from Surya Siddhanta, right, from based on astronomy. So it's opening can of worms. You are going to find that not only the researchers who are claiming these things, but their blind followers, who very proudly take a certain position. And frankly, that applies to even those individuals who may be following me blindly, and showing Shraddha in me. Now, as a Shraddha, there is a value to it. But if they just stay there, even my followers, I'm saying, and those of you who are listening to this, my followers, if you just stick there, but don't make even your best effort to understand this, then guys, how are we different? How is Sanatana Dharma different than other traditions? Okay, which also have sometimes the element of empiricism, scientific method, logical reasoning, but for most part, it is driven by dogma. How are we different? Okay. Now, in what way this particular discussion of the Mars mystery of Mahabharata evidence, whatever you want to call it, uh, has opened this can of worms, opened the Pandora's box. Okay. It is in this fashion. For example, what has happened is this. Where did we begin? We began with the evidence of Mars. Okay. And specifically the discussion about the vakra. Does that mean retrograde? And if vakra or vakri is not retrograde, then what does that vakra means? But also, where is the retrograde motion of Mars? And I preferred to start with the retrograde motion of Mars because it's so beautifully described. And therefore, I first went through what does retrograde motion of planets means, why does that occur, why Mars gets extremely bright, scary bright, why Jupiter gets bright, why Saturn gets bright when any of these superior planets go in retrograde. We also looked at what causes the retrograde motion of Venus, retrograde motion of Mercury, and so on. So we began with the retrograde motion of Mars. Then what did we do? Then we looked at some of the conjunctions, okay? So Mercury with a Mars, like as described on the first day of the war. Or we looked at Venus with Mars, closer to Mars, as seen on the first day of the war and described in the Mahabharata text. Then if we fast forward to the 18th day, we saw Mars, Venus, and Mercury seen together on the 18th day of the war. Now remember, what do you think comes next? Naturally, the vakra motion, vakri motion for Mars twice, once near Nakshatra Magha, another time near Nakshatra Jeshta Anuradha. And now that retrograde is already done, we explain vakra as what? As the oblique crossing of Mars or Jupiter, okay, near wherever it is described in the Mahabharata text, near the node of those individual planets. In case of Mars, Mahabharata text says near Magha and near Jeshta Anuradha. We could show for 5561 BC that is exactly the case. In case of Jupiter, Mahabharata text describes Shravanaicha Brahaspati, Jupiter going vakra, vakri, oblique crossing near Nakshatra Shravan, and we could show exactly that's what Jupiter did near Nakshatra Shravan in 5561 BC plus minus 1 year. Okay. Now, this is what I mean by opening the can of worms, opening Pandora's box. So if somebody thought, especially I bet the other existing Mahabharata dating researchers are thinking, oh, thank God, I think he's going to say, he meaning Nilesh, is going to say something about Mars, and people will soon forget, and life would be good for them because they will not able to show, and it is my open challenge, in a humble way, humble challenge to all the existing Mahabharata researchers, exceptions none, that if they are on the path of a Satya with the dates they are claiming, all they have to do is look at the 8 descriptions of Mars, come forward, and demonstrate how those particular observations match for the planet Mars for the year they are claiming. Okay, and here I make a request to all of you guys who are watching this video series. In your comments to this on YouTube, write down which specific alternate claim do you want me to check for the 8-piece evidence of Mars. Now, it's not sufficient that you just say the other researcher's name and the specific year that is claimed by that individual. But you have to show some familiarity of their works, some familiarity with their works. Otherwise, it's an extremely tamasic and lazy thing for you to ask, basically. That's not acceptable. So if you suggest, please include, not please, I mean, please, but must include, otherwise it will not be entertained, some information and include something that shows your familiarity with their works, but your familiarity with my works. I should have some sense that you have read it. You have read their works, you have read my works, you have watched the debates, if they existed, say, for example, with Dr. Konrad Elst or with Dr. Manish Pandit. Okay, if you are following on Twitter with some other Mahabharata researchers, all kinds of crazy comments they make about me personally, not about my research, they dare not. So personally, yeah, that's great. Have you seen in the Hindi movies, or the old Indian religious movies, like, somebody throws the arrow, but when the arrow comes, it becomes like a flower garland. I take it like that. That's how they become. They become extremely useful as educational tools, and I use them. I use them in this series. I use them in my blogs and so on. So that's all good. The way this has opened a Pandora's box or a can of worms is this. So we just started with Mars and 8 observations. And I was telling you guys, discussing that the other Mahabharata researchers would have thought, fortunately, okay, maybe this guy will talk about these 8 Mars descriptions that none of them can demonstrate, validate, corroborate. None of them for their year, for any of the 8 descriptions of the Mars. Now, guys, these are all from Mahabharata text. I have given you the specific references. And if any of them cannot demonstrate, validate, corroborate any of the 8 astronomy descriptions of a Mars, you have to start thinking, where is the problem? Okay, it is for you to think. They're not going to come and help you. Definitely, they're not going to come and help you with this. Okay. All right. And now what has done is, what this evidence discussion has done is, yes, we went through all the 8 descriptions, but now this evidence has connected Mercury in a very specific way, because on the first day of the war and also on the 18th day of the war, it should be in the vicinity of Mars. It has also connected the Venus evidence. Again, on the first day of the war, Mars needs to be somewhat closer to Venus, but also on the 18th day. On the 18th day, all 3 of them needs to be together in some fashion. Now, for vakra motion, Jupiter is connected with Mars. Okay. Now the question is, now that the vakra motion of Jupiter, such as Shravanaicha Brahaspati, Maghaswangarako vakra Shravanaicha Brahaspati, now that the vakra motion is not the retrograde motion, the next question we have to ask is, so where is the retrograde motion of Jupiter? And where is the retrograde motion of Venus? Is it been described? Where is the retrograde motion of Mercury? And is it being described in the Mahabharata text? And we have not looked at additional planets, but let me show you, for example. And what about Saturn? And actually, you're going to find not Mercury, it's just not described, but for Venus, Saturn, and Jupiter, the retrograde motions are described through multiple references in the Mahabharata text, which we have not looked at in this Mars discussion. That is what I mean by opening a can of worms. Now, in order to explain the vakri motions of Jupiter, the position of Jupiter at the time of the Mahabharata war, somewhere in the vicinity of Shravana Nakshatra, is already defined. The position of Venus is already defined somewhere near Mars. And we know where Mars was on the first day of the war. It was near Nakshatra, Shravan and Brahma Rashi. Okay, so we don't know how far from Mars. Now, in our case, exactly we know 7 degrees, but I'm saying some other researcher, okay, that person first has to show Mars on the first day of the war near Brahma Rashi, then has to show Venus is close by near Mars, Mercury is close by near Mars. They all could be seen, all three could be seen together. Mars and Venus could be seen together. Mercury and Mars could be seen together. So they're on the same side of the sun. That's a requirement for Venus and Mercury along with the Mars. And now we have to look at the retrograde descriptions of Venus, Saturn, and Jupiter from the Mahabharata text and show that actually that did happen. Something very fascinating. But you know what? This is just the beginning, guys. Okay. There are very consistent other descriptions, such as different celestial bodies becoming tishtita, certain celestial bodies becoming akramya. And we'll look at those. And so the tishtita akramya, it comes in the context of Saturn, it comes in the context of Jupiter, it comes in the context of one Shweta Graha, it comes in the context of one Shamo Graha, it comes in the context of a comet which is described as settled near Pushya. Okay, and guys, this is just going to go on and on. There are descriptions of Pida, Saturn giving Pida to Nakshatra Rohini, Jupiter giving Pida to Nakshatra Rohini on a very specific day of the war, 17th day of the war, when Karna was killed, and Sun and Moon together giving Pida to Nakshatra Rohini. Again, very specifically, the very fact the Sun and Moon were together, giving Pida to Nakshatra Rohini, again, that's on the first day of the war. And this all needs to come together. Again, even what I'm showing you here is again scratching the surface. Okay, so that's what I mean by opening the Pandora's box or can of worms. We just started with the innocent looking Mars descriptions, 8 of them. They're extremely powerful, and this is the reason. They are powerful by themselves, but the different other celestial bodies they are touching, such as Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter. And now you go after Jupiter and you find now Saturn comes in contact, a comet near Pushya comes in contact, Sun and Moon positions come in contact, okay? And it becomes like the Venn diagram, a complex jigsaw puzzle, a complex crossword puzzle, okay? So that's what we are going to solve. Let me see what I have, okay? And although I'm trying to elucidate this for a better understanding, this is not something I am doing for the first time. Now, there is one Mahabharata, I think Mahabharata researcher. You know, every time I will discuss something, she goes into her tantrums and will say, it is through her. I love it, by the way, when she says it. It is through her I learned these things. For example, she has claimed once that when she started talking about the nimitta, now I understood this is Arundhati is a nimitta, or all this evidence from Udyog Parva or Bhishma Parva, or as you will see from a Drona Parva and Shalya Parva, that is all evidence. All nimitta. Well, the words nimittas are there very clearly, okay, in Udyog Parva, in a Bhishma Parva, multiple places. So it's very, very clear what it is. What else? She says, oh, Kali Yuga. Yeah, we'll deal with that slowly, one at a time. Okay. That, I did not even realize that I have to solve the Kali Yuga problem in dating the Mahabharata war. No, what she has said is utter foolishness, utter nonsense. In fact, let me repeat this. And it is in my book, and I'm not changing the books. 100,000 plus copies are out there. When did the Mahabharata war happen? I have clearly said that the Kali Yuga, when Kali Yuga began, in the context of, in an Itihasic sense, from an Itihasa point of view, from a astronomy point of view, from a Panchanga point of view, those are all worthy subjects. But the point is, in order to determine the date of Mahabharata war, one does not need to know anything about the Kali Yuga. That is my statement. It is in my book. It is in many of my lectures, and I stand by that statement. Now, Jivan Rao's book on a Yuganta, the beginning of a Kali Yuga, and from a historical tradition, okay, from the tradition of the Mahabharata text, but also Purana text and many other texts, Harivamsha and so on. It's going to come out on 2nd of December. And I would encourage everyone to read that along with these books, along with these 3 books that you are seeing. This is how they will look on Amazon. And of course, if you are in India, you can still buy from Amazon, but they will cost you more for no reason. So you should actually buy a better quality books if you are in India from Subbu Publications. Okay, the cover looks different. The titles for the 2 of the 3 books are the same. And for the historic Rama, it is 12,209 BC. So that concludes our discussion on the Mars evidence of the Mahabharata text. And so I will take a pause in terms of the Mahabharata dating evidence, okay? Because I started this series, Shraddha and Pradnya, to find a way to answer the question so that I won't be answering these questions on Twitter or on a Facebook or when people write to me on the email. Okay, if I think the question is worthy enough, that I will respond only through this series, Shraddha and Pradnya. Okay, so just be aware that I have asked my volunteer team not to answer anything or respond to any questions on Twitter and email and Facebook, and they do it, and occasionally I also do it. I'm guilty, but that's going to go away. But you can still ask the questions there. It's very important if you want me to take your questions for this discussion. It's very important that not only you just ask a question and just move on, you show some evidence, good evidence that you have truly understood it. You have done your own work, okay, related to it, and not just asking a careless and casual questions. Okay, I mean, you can ask, but they may not be entertained. All right, with that, I would like to stop and see you soon in the next episode of Shraddha and Pradnya. Namaskar.